What's something that seems normal in your country, but would completely confuse someone from another place? Gun violence as the leading cause of death for children. In my country, the leading cause of death for children is guns. What's really shocking is that people in other countries often seem more outraged about this reality than we do. It's become so normalized here that the collective numbness to these tragedies is almost as disturbing as the events themselves. While many nations push for reform after incidents of violence, we seem trapped in a cycle where nothing substantial is done to prevent future deaths. This indifference is difficult for others to comprehend, especially in places where gun laws are stricter and children's safety is prioritized in different ways. The fact that this has become a recurring headline rather than a call to action is something that leaves outsiders baffled. Letting a senile man run the country. Letting a senile man run the country is an absurd yet all too real experience in some places. There's this pervasive sentiment that our leaders, often well beyond their prime, are out of touch with the actual needs of the population. What makes it worse is that we often feel powerless to make any meaningful changes. And sure, in some countries like the US, at least you can swap out one senile leader for another every 4 years, but does that really solve anything? It's a cyclical issue where leadership remains stagnant, detached from the rapidly evolving world. In many nations, this state of affairs is met with frustration, yet somehow, the system persists, driving hours to do mundane things. In the US, where the states are as big as entire European countries, driving 2, 3, or even 4 hours just to do something relatively ordinary is pretty common. Need to visit family or do some shopping at a specialty store? No problem, just hop in the car and spend half your day on the road. It's hard to imagine for people in smaller countries, where an hour's drive might take you into another country entirely. In places like Australia, it's quite similar, and the vast distances between towns or amenities mean that long drives are just a part of life. But for people from compact countries with everything close by, this lifestyle seems strange and exhausting. The fear of hospital-induced bankruptcy. Having to choose between likely bankruptcy after seeking care from a hospital or possibly dying at home because you're afraid to go to the hospital might sound like dystopian fiction, but it's a reality for millions in the US. People often delay seeking medical attention, even for serious conditions, simply because they fear the medical bills will bankrupt them. It's not uncommon for even those with insurance to get hit with massive out-of-pocket costs, as one person shared, recounting how a hospital visit for knee inflammation cost them $2,000, despite having insurance. The fear of the financial repercussions is so widespread that it leads to further health complications, making the system feel fundamentally broken. Pouring gravy on everything, even breakfast. Here, we put gravy on everything, even breakfast. It's a culinary quirk that often baffles foreigners. Imagine someone from another country sitting down at breakfast and watching in horror as gravy is poured over pancakes. They might be expecting syrup or fruit toppings, but instead, they're greeted with a savory sauce meant for dinner. In the US, especially in the South, gravy is a beloved condiment for biscuits, fried foods, and even mashed potatoes. However, taking it to breakfast foods can be a strange concept for people from other cultures, where such a heavy, savory flavor would not be considered appropriate for the morning. Cursing as a term of endearment. In certain places, casually calling people ***********, especially the ones you really, really like, is perfectly normal. This might sound shocking or offensive in many parts of the world, but in Australia, for example, it's just part of the everyday vernacular. The word, although incredibly taboo in some cultures, is thrown around with humor and affection down under. The casual use of such a strong term often leaves visitors bewildered, wondering how something so offensive elsewhere can be used so lightly, and even as a term of endearment. Obsessive hygiene, showering twice a day and brushing teeth 3 times. In some countries, showering twice a day and brushing teeth 3 times a day is just part of the daily hygiene routine. But when you mention this to people from other places, they often look at you like you're overdoing it. Isn't once a day enough? Well, not if you live in a hot, humid climate where staying fresh is a constant battle. While it may seem excessive in cooler regions, this routine is standard for those used to sweltering temperatures. What seems like an overzealous commitment to cleanliness for some is just a way to stay comfortable in others. Rice with every meal. For some cultures, rice is always included with meals because, simply put, a meal isn't complete without it. It's more than just a side dish, it's a fundamental part of every dining experience. Whether it's plain white rice, fried rice, or some variation of flavored rice, the dish is present from breakfast to dinner. To outsiders, especially in places where rice is not as culturally significant, this might seem monotonous or excessive. But for those raised with rice as a staple, it's unimaginable to go a day without it. The absence of rice at a meal would feel like something essential was missing. Taking off shoes before entering the house. In many countries, it's standard to take off your shoes before entering the house to keep the floors clean and the space comfortable. However, some friends from other countries might think it's strange. Why do you do that? They ask. For them, shoes indoors might not be an issue, but in countries where the tradition is common, it's all about maintaining cleanliness. The contrast between cultures that embrace shoes indoors versus those that prioritize removing them can be stark, but once you explain the logic behind it, people often come around to the idea. Greeting with small talk and friendliness. In my country, it's pretty normal to greet people with a friendly wave or even small talk, even with strangers. It's a common sight at grocery stores, on walks, or even in line at the coffee shop. This level of casual friendliness is deeply ingrained in the culture, but I've heard from visitors that it can be confusing or even uncomfortable, especially if they come from countries where interactions with strangers are more formal or reserved. They often wonder why everyone seems to want to chat, but for us, it's just a natural part of being social and neighborly. The national obsession with Donald Duck in Sweden. In Sweden, it's a common tradition to watch Donald Duck cartoons on Christmas Eve at exactly 3 p.m. sharp. This isn't just a casual thing, it's a national event. Every year, millions of Swedes gather around their televisions to watch a specific 1958 Disney special called From All of Us to All of You. Known locally as Kalle Anka och Hans Vänner önskar God July, meaning Donald Duck and his friends wish you a Merry Christmas, this show is deeply embedded in Swedish holiday culture. It may seem odd to outsiders why an old Disney cartoon would garner such massive attention, but in Sweden, it's as beloved as Santa Claus himself. The habit of stating the obvious. In some places, it's entirely normal to point out the painfully obvious in conversation. Imagine seeing a friend eating at a restaurant during lunch and saying, "Hey, having your lunch?" Or spotting them in a supermarket and asking, "Doing your shopping I see?" It's a funny, harmless quirk of communication that can be endearing but also completely baffling to someone who isn't used to it. This type of conversational habit reinforces connection but can come across as redundant or even odd in cultures where silence or directness is more valued. While it's usually done with a smile, it definitely catches outsiders off guard when they're expecting more meaningful conversation. Beer cheaper than water. In some countries, beer is literally cheaper than water. Imagine being in a place where ordering a pint of beer at a restaurant is more affordable than asking for bottled water. It's an eye-opening aspect of certain cultures, particularly in places like Germany or the Czech Republic, where beer is not only a beverage but a way of life. For tourists, this is both confusing and delightful, as they suddenly find themselves in a position where drinking alcohol seems more financially sensible than staying hydrated. Getting shot in school. A heartbreaking reality in certain parts of the world, especially the US, is the normalization of school shootings. For people living outside the country, the fact that this happens so regularly, and yet so little change occurs to prevent it, is utterly shocking. They can't understand how a place that's supposed to be safe for children has become a battlefield of gun violence. Every year, the numbers climb, and tragically, many people have grown numb to the headlines, despite the devastation this brings to countless families. Ireland's quirky realities. Ireland has a host of unique cultural quirks that might leave outsiders scratching their heads. For example, being called mad is actually a compliment, and potatoes are so deeply ingrained in the diet that they're served multiple times a week. Timekeeping is loose, with a 20-minute grace window being completely acceptable. Drinking at 14 is so common that no one bats an eye, and while it's technically illegal, it's part of the Irish social fabric. The country is also filled with cultural contradictions. racial slurs are unfortunately common, but people will fiercely oppose the use of American slang like soda or high school. Public transport is notoriously unreliable, often worse than in countries experiencing conflict, and young parents are a frequent sight due to the late legalization of abortion and the high price of contraception. The Catholic Church's oppressive influence during the 20th century has also left many with a disdain for organized religion. Combine all this with the sight of people wearing jerseys everywhere and letting their dogs run free in parks, and you get a picture of a place where tradition, modernity, and chaos mix in a way that's uniquely Irish. The quirky obsession with guns in America. The United States' relationship with guns is baffling to much of the world. Many countries can't comprehend why guns are such a vital part of American identity, or how a person's right to own them outweighs the staggering loss of life, particularly in school shootings. Even as people in other nations react with horror, the American gun debate rages on, with little movement toward reform. Outsiders often find it hard to wrap their minds around why this issue isn't met with more urgency, especially when the loss of life continues to mount year after year. Tipping for everything. Tipping culture in the U.S. has reached such extremes that it now encompasses nearly every interaction, from fast food orders to buying a wedding dress. What was once reserved for waitstaff in restaurants has ballooned into a societal expectation for almost any service, and it's not uncommon to be asked for a tip in the most unexpected situations. People from other countries, where tipping is either unnecessary or very modest, are left scratching their heads, wondering why the employer doesn't just pay their workers a fair wage. American public bathrooms. Privacy is almost non-existent in American public bathrooms, and this bizarre lack of concern for basic decency confounds visitors from places where higher standards are the norm. The gaps in the stalls, the flimsy locks, and the general disregard for creating a private space make American bathrooms something of a cultural oddity. Tourists often ask, why can't these stalls just go all the way to the floor? It's a mystery even many Americans struggle to understand. School shootings as a regular occurrence. It's tragic and horrifying, but in the U.S., school shootings have become so common that they don't always make top headlines anymore. The sheer frequency of these events is shocking, yet the country remains paralyzed by political gridlock, preventing meaningful change. For people in other nations, the idea that children regularly face this level of danger at school is unimaginable. They're left wondering how a society can allow this to continue without significant action. Siestas and bidets, everyday comfort in some countries. In countries like Spain or Italy, a siesta is a cherished afternoon break, offering people a chance to rest during the hottest part of the day. It's something that confuses those from faster-paced cultures where every minute is meant to be productive. Another everyday habit that surprises foreigners is the use of a bidet. Found in nearly every bathroom, the bidet is seen as essential for hygiene, and its absence in many other countries is baffling to locals. While some travelers might be hesitant at first, those who try it often can't imagine going back. Queuing culture in some places. The art of queuing is taken very seriously in certain countries. People will instinctively line up in an orderly fashion, and any attempt to cut the line is met with immediate disapproval. It's a behavior so ingrained that even in unmarked or unofficial queues, everyone knows their place. This is especially common in places like the UK, where breaking queuing etiquette is a cardinal sin. The patience and respect for personal space in queues can be perplexing for visitors from more chaotic cultures where pushing to the front is a norm. Strange habits with plugs and soft drinks. In many countries, electrical plugs and outlets vary widely, and for travelers, navigating this can be confusing. But in the UK, the plug design is unique, and some argue it's the safest in the world. The plug itself is bulkier than those found elsewhere, leading to the question, why so big? Similarly, the concept of free refills on soft drinks in the US is a source of amazement for people visiting from other places where you're expected to pay for each additional drink. It's a small but striking cultural difference that leaves a lasting impression on those used to paying per glass. Calling people like they see them. In the Caribbean, it's not uncommon for people to be called out by how they appear. This may seem strange or even offensive to outsiders, but here, it's part of the cultural norm. Dark-skinned people are often called blackie, mixed individuals are known as browning, and white folks might be referred to as whitey. It's casual, direct, and without ill intent, though for expats, it can be a bit shocking at first. Even if you're not actually from China, as in the case of my son who looks Asian, people will still greet him with, "Hey, China boy." This kind of straightforwardness might raise eyebrows elsewhere, but here it's just another part of daily life. Communal BBQs in parks. In some countries, it's completely normal to have communal gas BBQs in public parks. This means anyone can just show up, cook their food, and then clean up afterward for the next person. This sense of shared space and responsibility might confuse people from cultures where communal amenities aren't as common, but in places like Australia, it's a perfectly normal way to enjoy a sunny day. It's a fantastic way to gather with friends and family, and many visitors are pleasantly surprised to see such a relaxed, communal way of dining outdoors. Calling traffic lights robots. In some parts of the world, particularly South Africa, traffic lights are referred to as robots. It's a term that throws off many visitors because they expect it to mean something entirely different, like an actual robot. But no, it's just the local way of describing the red, yellow, and green lights that guide traffic. It's an endearing quirk of language that sticks out, especially for those used to the more straightforward term, traffic lights. Saying, "Hi, how are you?" to strangers. In some cultures, making small talk with strangers is second nature. Saying, "Hi, how are you?" even to people you don't know in grocery stores, elevators, or while passing on the street is a way of life in places like the US. It's a gesture of friendliness that might seem odd to those from more reserved cultures, where talking to strangers is kept to a minimum. For those visiting, it can feel like people are constantly trying to start conversations, but for the locals, it's just a simple way to acknowledge others. School shootings. Unfortunately, school shootings have become an all-too-common reality in the United States. This phenomenon baffles and horrifies people from other countries, where such events are rare or unheard of. The notion that students can face such danger in a place of learning, and that little is done to prevent future occurrences, is difficult for outsiders to comprehend. Every headline brings renewed shock, yet the issue persists with little change, leaving many to wonder why something so tragic has been allowed to become normalized. Maple pops in the snow. A fun, uniquely Canadian tradition is making maple pops. People drop maple syrup in fresh snow, wrap it around a stick, and let it harden into a delicious treat. It's a simple but beloved activity, especially during the colder months. Outsiders who visit during winter are often surprised by this practice. What's seen as a seasonal snack in Canada is something that might never occur to people from warmer climates or places without snow. Drinking like there's no tomorrow. In some cultures, heavy drinking is deeply embedded in social life. People party and drink as if there's no tomorrow, consuming alcohol in vast quantities. This kind of drinking culture can be shocking to visitors who aren't used to seeing alcohol play such a major role in everyday life, especially when it starts early in the day and continues long into the night. For many locals, it's just how things are done, but for outsiders, it's something to either marvel at or fear. Tilting windows in Germany. One of the more curious home features in Germany is the ability to tilt windows so they open halfway. This unique design offers a way to let in fresh air without fully opening the window, creating a secure but airy environment. It's a common and practical part of German architecture, but it can be perplexing to people from countries where windows are either fully open or closed with no in-between. Measuring distance in time. In Canada, people often measure distance by time rather than kilometers or miles. When someone asks how far away something is, the answer might be, about 2 hours north of Toronto, rather than a specific distance. It's a habit that baffles people from other parts of the world, where distances are measured more precisely. For Canadians, though, it makes perfect sense, especially when considering how vast the country is. Milk in bags. In some parts of Canada, specifically in Ontario and the surrounding provinces, milk comes in plastic bags. It's a system that confuses people from other countries, where milk is typically found in cartons or bottles. Visitors often wonder why Canadians don't just use jugs or cartons, but for the locals, bagged milk is just a normal, everyday thing. You pour it into a reusable pitcher, snip off the corner of the bag, and there you have it, ready for your cereal or coffee. Big dog with a big hog confusion. In some regions, particularly in Georgia, USA, there's a strange expression that can leave outsiders very confused. When someone from the University of Georgia explains that they are a big dog with a big hog, it's usually said with pride and humor. However, it can lead to a lot of bewilderment, especially when the person in question takes it a step further and actually shows off what they're referring to. It's definitely one of those, you had to be there, moments that makes little sense to those unfamiliar with local lingo. Congratulating everyone at a birthday party. In certain European countries, it's customary not only to congratulate the person whose birthday it is but also their friends and family. You'll find yourself at a birthday party saying, "Congratulations," to everyone present, creating a communal celebration of the individual's special day. It's a tradition that surprises outsiders, who are used to the birthday person being the sole focus of attention. Eating snails as an appetizer. In countries like France, snails, escargot, are a beloved delicacy often served as an appetizer. The sight of people savoring these slimy creatures can be off-putting to those not familiar with French cuisine, but it's completely normal there. Visitors often have to get over the initial shock of seeing snails on their plates before daring to take a bite, and some even end up loving the taste. English tea culture. In England, tea is more than just a beverage, it's an institution. The ritual of drinking tea, whether in the morning, afternoon, or at social gatherings, is a cornerstone of British culture. Visitors often find the nation's love for tea fascinating, as it's not just about the drink itself but also the social practices that come with it.